Hi, everyone. Every week, Vanessa and I have been bringing you stories of missing and unidentified women, and we are taking a bit of a holiday break so that we can come back in 2025 with more important and incredible stories of these women for you. This week, instead, we are sharing with you some of our Patreon content. If you want to support us, that is one of the places that you can do so. And this is a little bit of the type of conversations that we have there. This is one of the conversations that we have called Behind the Poems, where Vanessa asks me questions about the poems that we include in our episodes.
And now we're going to listen to Aimee's poem, Battle Lines, about Bitter Creek Betty, read by Ginger Strand herself.
Battle Lines. Unidentified woman discovered March 1st, 1992, in Bitter Creek, Wyoming. I once kissed the ruby flesh of a hummingbird held against a rest stop sign on the day before I left my body in ice at the curve of a prairie road. In this life, our blood is where we make a fist against anger. We tattoo roses to our chests, memorials to love and lost fortunes. What we sell is ourselves to the fluttering of breath, when the darkness is a memory of miles, drifting past windows of light.
Hi, Aimee.
Hi, Vanessa.
And hi, Patreon listeners. Today in Behind the Poem, we are talking to Aimee about her poem Battle Lines from episode 13, about an unidentified woman discovered March 1st, 1992 in Bitter Creek, Wyoming, also known in our episode as Bitter Creek Betty. Aimee, what made you want to write about Bitter Creek Betty?
So, I've said before, but I think it bears repeating, especially for new listeners to Behind the Poems, which is that I think a lot in images. And so when I was exploring her story, basically what happens is this female truck driver pulls up on the side of the road. It's like the offshoot of 180, and she sees like what looks like a body in the distance, and it's cold, it's wintry, it's still March in Wyoming, and like that image of just like this like desolate location in Wyoming, and that this woman has been placed there, and then people are driving by and they don't see her because she's off the road. It's just like that, both that image and that feeling stuck with me. Also, Bitter Creek Betty had this like rose heart tattoo on her chest, and so that made me think about like what's the kind of images that I associate with roses, and how many women have rose tattoos, which is like a lot of us, right?
Yeah, so one of the things that struck me with this poem is it does have a lot of really beautiful imagery. It's one of those poems where like a lot of the meanings seem like a little bit blurred. Is this because you just don't know very much about Bitter Creek Betty? I know we've talked about this before in a lot of poems, especially when they're unidentified women. You just don't have much to go with. So is this
right? Like, yeah, even in our episode, we talked about Bitter Creek Betty and what we know, but like a lot of the episode, we ended up talking about like how much risk, particularly women, face traveling, particularly like hopping from tractor trailer to tractor trailer. And so, yeah, like I don't know much about her, and I don't want to like make any like suppositions about who she was, right? So I just have to like, if I don't have that, what do I have? And what I have is images, right?
Right. And like some of the other poems we've discussed too, like this one was unidentified at the time that you wrote it. So when you are relying solely on imagery, when we don't have so much information about somebody, where are you getting your imagery from? Because you have like, we talked about like the tattooed roses. So that's actually a tattoo she has.
Yes.
But then like the ruby flesh of the hummingbird, where are you getting these?
Right. So like it says, I once kissed the ruby flesh of a hummingbird held against a rest stop sign. And that image comes from my child. So when I was a child, I think I've mentioned like my parents would just like throw us into the back of their Mustang, and then they would like drive across country, and that would be our vacation. But like we would barely ever stop anywhere. We would just be like driving nonstop for like a week, and then like we'd go home. Because like my dad wanted to go places, but he didn't want to be places, if that makes sense.
So you went on a car ride.
So we went on a very long car ride, and like basically we'd drive all day, and then we would stop at like hotels and motels and like hope for like a hotel motel pool.
Is that why in adulthood you like to stop at all the places?
Yes. Like I want to be at all the places and I want to spend like hours at the places. But I just remember like one of the times that we drove out west, right? Because like these landscapes like Wyoming and Colorado and like the Dakotas like were my like dad's drive around destinations. But like I just remember as a child like stopping at this one place. It was kind of like maybe a touristy trap place. I'm not sure, but it was like a place to like get pancakes and stuff. So like part diner, but it also felt like a little bit story. And outside they had like this massive hummingbird feeder that was just like covered in hummingbirds. It was like the most hummingbirds I've seen in one place ever in my life. It was like a core part of my memory. So when I start thinking about like Wyoming and out there, like that in my head is tied to like that kind of image, right? So like hummingbirds have to be in here. And like nobody's actually kissing, a hummingbird's throat or anything. I don't know, maybe someone has. But
you haven't.
But like this like
hasn't.
imagining of
right.
like this like moment. Right?
Okay, and then just up against the idea of like the rest stop being there. So
Right.
it's not anything
No,
concrete.
yeah,
It's just
like
just imagery.
Like part of imagery, right? And then like those travels, like if you're a kid and you were a kid in the 90s and your parents threw you in the back of a car and drove you across the country, you are 100% trying to get like every tractor trailer driver to like honk for you. And like so truck drivers are also part of my memory, which is also like part of like what has happened to her, right? Like she was killed by a long haul trucker. So all of those things like interconnect in my brain.
So when you started thinking about that, you just went straight to those car trips and
hummingbirds and tractor trailers and pancakes. Right? And like, there's a lot of anger in this poem too, as it kind of progresses. It goes from like beauty to like kind of anger.
Right. And then when you get to the end part and you're saying out here our children are being eaten by wolves.
Mm-hmm.
So can you kind of bring some clarity on where you were going with that?
Yeah, it's kind of like this, longer anger about like what's happening to women, right? Like out here our children are being eaten by wolves, right? Like out here our women are being attacked. Like who are the wolves and like who do you need to like watch out for?
So when we discussed this case, you mentioned that you were reading Ginger Strand's book right before we had the discussion, and she's the one who read this poem for us. We just loved the way she read that.
Right.
But did you find that like since you wrote this and then in preparation for the podcast, you read her book, was there anything that struck you reading that? Like, was there any more information that you got from that? Or
yeah, I mean, I loved reading Ginger's book because it really illuminates like the highway system of America, and like she really takes this like big picture look at it. And what I find interesting about her book is she like both says, hey, part of like what we're worried about with killers on the road, right, is manufactured, right? Like it's most of us are just going to go to point A to point B. Like we don't have to like worry extensively. And so there's all these campaigns back in the day to like make you worry about don't hitchhike. But then also there was like, don't pick up hitchhikers because all of them could be killers. And so her book kind of addresses like that factually speaking, that's some like American myth making, right? On the other hand, she also leaves space for, hey, there are some serial killer truck drivers. And really, like we talked about in the episode, like we don't want to make truck drivers sound terrible. That's not what she's doing or what we're doing. But there are some reasons, mainly moving from place to place.
Right. And aside from like truck drivers or hitchhikers, just people in general. Like we can't trust every single person we see, regardless of what they do or where they are. It's just common sense. But it's not necessary to be afraid of every single person out there either.
Exactly. So it's always this like dynamic of do sometimes things bad happen? And yes, but at the same time, like do we often inflate that risk beyond what it is? Also, yes.
Yes.
Right. And so, reading her her book like helped me think through the kind of the almost, end of the poem where she's talking about, where the speaker of the poem is talking about like selling ourselves to the miles of the road, right? Drifting past. And that kind of concept of being someone who is invested in mobility and moving across the country and not staying in one place. Like I'm like a settler, like I'm a barnacle. I'm going to barnacle onto a location, take me traveling. Don't throw me in the back seat of a Mustang.
You're doing it different now.
Right. Yes. Like I want to go leisurely explore a location, but there are some people who just really like that ability to be mobile and move throughout different spaces without owing anything to anyone. And so, reading her book and then rethinking back on my poem at that kind of stage, like, oh, like this concept of who desires that mobility and why.
So, I mean, from our what we talked about in the last episode, there's a lot more about this case now than you did at the time that you wrote this poem.
Yeah. So, at my recent campus visit, I was talking about how, like, I wrote these poems. I think the poems are important, but also they're kind of an artifact of the time that they were written. And so at the time this poem was written, what we knew about her was really minimal. It was an unidentified woman found at the curve of this road by a trucker, and she had a rose tattoo, and they were able to trace who did the tattoo. It was like a man in Tucson who like also didn't know much about her. And that's like kind of the extent of what we knew. And, since then, since this poem was written and since that moment in time, we now know so much more about the case. Like we know that she's connected to another unidentified body case in Wyoming. We also know she's connected to a murder of a woman. We know that their killer has been arrested and will eventually go to trial. And I think like that's the thing about any of these conversations that we have. What is heartening about them is that we're able to have conversations in which things have changed since the moment that I first encountered that story. And that is it's devastating, but it's also heartwarming to know that we are making progress. Not we, but like the world is making progress on their cases. Like they're not necessarily set in stone, and that pushing forward by talking about them and getting attention on them is important.
So, I mean, really, in another 5 or 10 years, we might even know who this woman is. And that's kind of exciting to think about it that way. It must feel so strange for you to have this book of poems that you wrote at this time. Like you said, it's almost like a time capsule of that time. And then just to think about like in 10, 15 years from now, looking back in your book and hoping that you know so much more about each of these cases, that thought has got to be a little bit exciting that could happen.
Right. And that has changed dramatically over time. I think we're coming to a place where science is developing so far that a lot of these unidentified women cases in particular are going to be solved. And I highly suspect, since she's been taken out of the NamUs database, that this one has been solved. And so I hope that her family has some answers. It's likely that if they were able to find her family, they know. And, I think that will provide some information for them. I don't necessarily need to know her name. Sometimes they don't release that information. I just need to know, like, that it was solved. And so hopefully that information comes out.
Well, thank you, Aimee. And thank you to our Patreon supporters for helping us to bring more stories like this and more behind the poems. Ginger Strand is the author of 1 novel and 3 books of narrative nonfiction, as well as many magazine features. Her book, Killer on the Road, Violence and the American Interstate, tells the entwined stories of the American interstate highway system and the serial killers who haunted it, looking at how America became more mobile and more violent at the same time.
For more information about our show or to check out other shows on the network, please visit evergreenpodcasts.com. Bye, Vanessa.
Bye, Aimee.